Hi, I'm Lisa Dahl, health and well-being coach. Welcome to Getting Healthy Without Rules. This show is about understanding the things that impact your wellness and finding ways to improve it. In this show, we take a non-diet, no-rule approach to health and wellness. Health and wellness is a moving target. We all have different needs and opportunities to improve it. This approach allows you to make the best choice with the information that you have right now. It helps you to be present, flexible, and resilient. In addition, I support you in moving from judgment to curiosity and offering yourself self-compassion. It is time we are all a little kinder to ourselves. Today's episode is about diet culture and the impact it has on body image and eating disorders. Our society has a lot of opinions about body image, body neutrality, and self-acceptance, which sadly is contributing to an alarming rise in poor mental health and eating disorders. The key to shifting this trajectory is to learn how to develop our own internal guidelines based on our individual values, priorities, and needs. We need to empower ourselves to quiet the noise around us. As I have shared before, this topic is one that I am passionate about personally and professionally, as it has impacted my life for almost 50 years. One of my missions is to create body acceptance for all. I have learned that body shame and the urge to hide can trigger a downward spiral, and deliberately practicing empowering thoughts can help prevent it. The reality is that these thoughts are deeply rooted in our society and are pushed upon us at an early age. We are taught to believe that our imperfectly perfect bodies are unacceptable and need fixing. And there is a long list of body attributes in diet culture's crosshairs: too wide, too curvy, too much hair, wrong-shaped nose, breasts not just right, and lips too thin. And it is not just about women. Diet culture tells boys and men they can't be desirable and successful without the right amount of weight, hair, height, and muscle. Today, we dive into what diet culture is, how it impacts our mental health, how to recognize and rise above its harmful messaging, and ways to support your family and friends who may be suffering from the effects of diet culture. Be sure to stay until the end for this week's healthy practice to help you tune out diet culture's negative messaging. I am excited to introduce today's expert guest, Emily Gordon. Dr. Gordon is a licensed clinical psychologist in private practice in Natick, Massachusetts. She specializes in working with adolescents, young adults, and adults of all ages with eating disorders and body image struggles. Dr. Gordon began her career working in adolescent residential treatment programs at McLean Hospital and has supervised trainees in many settings. Dr. Gordon enjoys speaking and presenting on a wide range of topics, including adolescent development, parenting, the impact of social media on body image, and general teaching about eating disorder awareness. Emily, welcome to the show. I'm so excited you're here. As in previous episodes, we will use the word fat or larger bodied. We use those words as simple descriptors without judgment. Fat is simply another adjective, like thin, and it's up to us to remove the stigma and the negative connotation that society and diet culture have created. So welcome once again.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it is absolutely my pleasure, and it is a topic that is really near and dear to my heart.
Yes.
So based on your practice and experience, what can you tell us about the state of mental health today?
Good place to start. So I think we've all heard the buzzwords, right? That mental health is on the rise, concerns are on the rise. And I think I'm finding in my practice and in the world around us that is true. We're seeing rising rates of anxiety, rising rates of depression, increased suicidality, rising rates of eating disorders, substance abuse. So clearly, I think there's something going on, and those rates are rising. There's lots of different theories and reasons why. I know we're going to get into that. And there's also some concerning data that girls and boys and the different rates are impacting different genders. We're seeing that a lot of the data is showing that girls, in particular younger girls and transgender children, are experiencing higher rates of anxiety and depression, which is very concerning.
is the data showing where that's coming from?
Yeah, so I'm not a researcher and I'm not a sort of data analyst. I think if we dug into it, then yes, there probably are some, and we have some theories, and we will talk about, I think, some of those theories.
Now is a great time to really kind of unpack on what your thoughts are, and absolutely appreciate that you are not, your specialty is working at the client level,
Yep.
not in the data research. And so what what do you believe are the cause of the rising
I
rates?
think that the first thing is, so COVID kind of, in my opinion, like exposed all of this. I think it was there before COVID. But I think COVID has not only exposed it, but it also has really made it worse.
It's exasperated
it. And the reasons why COVID has exasperated is that clearly it was a stressful and difficult time that we all lived through. And also, if we think about sort of the developmental spectrum of experiences and learning and developmental tasks that were not met. So we're seeing, kids and teens and young adults who sort of missed out on key developmental experiences.
They didn't have any outlet.
They didn't have some of the normal things that, that like sort of contribute to healthy development. And it really was a very stressful time. I also think that the culture we live in is just a really difficult culture to live in, right? If you think about the last 4 to 8 years, there's climate, sort of like climate existential issues. There's political unrest. There's, sort of polarization and more sort of racism and hate and intolerance and financial stresses. And I think that people are living in like a very difficult time. While they are also sort of inundated with these messages 24 hours a day, like, messages about what's happening in the world and all of the really awful things.
I'm probably older than you are. When we grew up, being home was the safe space for most of us. Not everybody has that lived experience. In general, you come home, you shut the door, you're in a safe space. And now everything is just streamed right into whether it is your computer, your phone, your TV, that you have to purposely shut the world out.
You do.
Otherwise, it can take over your thoughts.
And I think if we think about, sort of the news and the media and like all of the messages that are coming in, like, the stories are more extreme, right? Everything is sort of more escalated and more heightened. And that was something I experienced during COVID is, I had the news on, but I could feel my own anxiety increasing as I was watching certain TV shows or certain news outlets, right? And so, I was just sort of joking in my family this week that I really don't turn the news on. And I recognize that personally that benefits me, like it helps. And yet I don't want to not be informed, right? And I don't want to not be aware of what's going on and sort of take action. But it really is stressful.
It's learning to find the balance that serves you personally, and you still want to be aware.
Yeah.
And when you go onto your Google feed, if you've hit one story, all of a sudden your entire feed is shifted on that. Yeah. And it's hard to find the balance
It's hard to figure out how to be informed and participatory and yet sort of safeguard your own stress and, like health and wellness.
And it's, you hit on something that's really important, is being in tuned enough to know what those triggers are. And it's something that's learned. Sometimes people just accept the fact that they feel their heart beating faster or the stress and the tension, and they can't really identify what the cause is and how to be able to create that protective bubble to step away from it.
Well, that's really important. And I think something I take for granted as someone who's sort of been trained in learning about my own my own reactions, a lot of years of training. Because I think everything as I was thinking about some of the topics of conversation today and, what's important for parenting and what's important for health and wellness and, how do we safeguard against, like, how do we help people make their own rules? And, everything is actually about self-awareness and being able to understand what's going on in you and what you think and feel and need and what are your values and priorities and sort of how does that interface with like the world around
and
us.
it gives a new meaning to self-care. You know, sometimes we think that self-care is very frivolous,
Yes.
and we think of the very materialistic things. Oh, I'm going to go get a manicure or a pedicure.
I think it's presented as like simplistic.
And it's so much deeper and has so much more value than that. What should parents know about the effects of diet culture on their children's self-esteem and emotional health?
Yeah. They should know that it is affecting their children's self-esteem and mental health. And they should know that, and I have a definition of diet culture so we all know what we're talking about, but they should know that it's there and it's real. And in some ways it feels like it's this sort of overwhelming thing that like, you know, is like permeates everything. And so it can feel, I think, a little hopeless, but it's really not. As I give talks, and one of my favorite things to do, one of the feedback I've gotten, I have sort of a long list of do's and don'ts. And I always get really good feedback about like, it's so helpful because there actually are things that you can do and there are things that you should try not to do. So first let's just define diet culture.
Because it's such an important, it's a word that has become it's used often, it's referred to in books and media.
Yep.
And I don't know that people truly understand the depth of what it is. So please share.
Yeah. So I kind of did my own, so here's a way of defining diet culture. It's not inclusive, but it is a way. So diet culture is the social expectation that tells us how we should eat and look, and that if our bodies look a certain way and we do what we should do, then we are more accepted and even superior. So there's sort of moralizing and shouldn't of what we look like and what we do and eat. There's a pervasive belief that appearance, thinness, and body shape are more important than physical, psychological, and general well-being, right? So this idea that what you look like matters more than anything else. The idea that controlling your body, especially diet, by limiting what and how much you do is normal. It tells us that not only does thinness and dieting equate to health, but that the pursuit of health and this thinness makes you morally superior. It also normalizes labeling food as good and bad, and our actions as deserving or not deserving. And the last piece that I will add is that it sort of is this like allure that that diet and thinness, you know, is sort of like the answer to things, and that it will help us feel more connected and better. And I think that ultimately that is not true, but it's really
ingrained.
It's ingrained, and it's really compelling.
Having, on the personal side, having been all in, and having to find my way out, is that it is real.
It's very real.
It is taught to us since we are little. And when you get accolades for thin privilege, it feeds it, and you lose perspective of what is important, the value, your own self-worth, and how do you differentiate between wellness, positive mental health, and the downward spiral that diet culture can suck you into.
Yes. Well, I'm sorry that's been a part of your
it's just my lived experience.
And I think what you probably have learned, right, is that there is this appeal and allure, and it can feel like you are doing the right thing or taking care of yourself, and there's a real fear of what will happen if you don't, right? I mean, I sort of coined this phrase in one of my sessions recently where I said we have to radically reject, you know, these messages and this culture, but I think we do. We have to radically reject it, although we can't do that until we are aware and we recognize the role that it's playing. But you know, sometimes when I bring this up in sessions, like really sort of like look at me like,
is that even possible?
Is that even possible? And like, are you crazy? How could I do that? And nobody in my life would understand that. And I understand, like, that is real. And yet I think there are more and more people who are doing it, and more supports and ways to go about it. But it absolutely can feel scary.
It is, especially because it's not only is it an internal personal thing, it is an outward visual thing.
Absolutely.
And when you are something yesterday and something different 3 days from now, and you look visibly different over time, when you have been told that this is the better thing.
Well, and when there's this value that matters.
Right.
Because that shouldn't matter.
How do we get it so that it doesn't matter?
Yeah.
Is the bigger question.
That's the bigger question. So I think that happens, like, we each need to take our own individual steps, and then we need to expand that kind of to the people around us. And we really need to be aware of our own, going back to what we were talking about before, of like sort of being aware of our own reactions and thoughts and feelings. We need to be aware of like our own thoughts and values and judgments, and really try to like put a stop to perpetuating those ideas.
It's creating those intentional thoughts.
Yes.
And it's not just, you can't just say, oh, all of a sudden you're going to go think this. It's not something that needs to be fixed. It's something that needs to be healed, and that it takes time to unpack.
Right.
Tell me, what should parents know about the effects of diet culture on their children's self-esteem and emotional health?
Yeah. So, so what we know, so we think about diet culture, and then we think about what we know, or what I know and what I think you know, about the impact or the effects of dieting, right? Or on this pressure to look a certain way, to control one's body. And what we know, there is a multitude of research out there that tells us that dieting does not work, right? And yet there is all this talk and emphasis on being on diets or being healthy. And what we know is that when people go on a diet or they try to make changes to their eating, that can really have some pretty severe effects. We don't know how it's going to affect who in what way, so that's the dilemma that we have. But we know that going on a diet is actually one of the biggest triggers of an eating disorder.
The thing that we think is going to fix what's wrong is actually the catalyst, the starting point of that downward spiral.
Right. Which seems counterintuitive. And again, it sort of seems like it is this fix or solution for the things that we think are wrong. But we have to really examine what we think is wrong.
Because it's the root of what's the problem.
It's the root of
the diet is just the Band-Aid.
Yes.
And when people go on a diet, they think that they're going to be one and done. They don't understand that it's a lifelong thing that you're setting yourself up for.
Correct. So one of the things that, and I may be mixing questions, so
it's okay. We can go in any direction. It's all good.
So I think one of the things that we sort of like talking about mental health and talking about parenting, right, is that we all have difficult feelings. We live in a world where things are stressful, where we have worries, where sometimes we feel sad. And I think that we want to help people understand that, certainly if there are significant issues, we want to address them, but we also want to help people feel empowered to handle their feelings, that having difficult feelings is in itself not a bad thing.
It's normal.
It's normal. Of course, again, there are, if you're feeling sad or lonely every day, or it's getting in the way of your functioning, then of course that's something that we want to address. But generally speaking, having difficult feelings is not a bad thing. And I think that kids and people turn to diets, they turn to healthy eating, they turn to all sorts of different eating behaviors as a way of coping with what is on the inside. And so one of the things that I talk about a lot, I think is really important, is helping people to deal with feelings in more helpful and healthy ways so that they are not then vulnerable to, feeling like, oh, a diet will help me feel better.
Right. We spend so much time when our kids are little helping them have relationships with other people,
Yep.
doing the right things. We don't really help them have a relationship with themselves to be able to identify that their thoughts and their feelings and that they all go hand in hand.
Well, that is absolutely true. And I think that is because of our own fears.
Absolutely.
And the pressures on us as parents, and on this culture that sort of teaches that we know best for you. And that's, I think, you clearly are immersed in intuitive eating.
Right.
And, I think that where we go awry is sort of mistrusting and dictating what kids should do, what's the right thing to do.
As a parent, my children are now 31 and 26. And we used to call it the art of negotiation. Mm-hmm. And if I could have a do-over, the one thing that I would definitely do over is to empower them more and for me to be quiet more.
Yeah.
That I didn't have the belief that they actually knew more.
Yeah.
And that's a missing component. Like, parents don't trust themselves enough to trust their children to make the best decisions and to be able to allow them to make those mistakes and to help them pick up the pieces with compassion versus with the judgment.
I think that is 100% true.
And there is no perfect parent.
Right.
Like, we're going to take that off the table.
Right.
And we all would love do-overs to some extent.
Sure. This sort of silly example that I have to this is a kid getting ready for school, and, we were like thinking about like, how do I go shampoo shopping, right? What do you mean, how do you go shampoo shopping? You go to the store and you buy shampoo, right? And then as I was going through my to-do list of all of the things that needs to be done, I was like, oh, well, I'll just go to Target and, I'll get all these things off my list. And then I thought to myself, what am I doing, right? And I said, no, I'm not going to do this. And we went together to Target, and
right.
But it's so much easier. It's quicker. It's more cost effective. It would have solved all of my problems to just go to Target and sort of like go down the list. But I realized, I sort of stopped myself that that's something that it was important to do.
Right. How to empower them to have the self-efficacy, and it starts with very simple things like, pick it out. Why do you want this? Why is this better one? What is it that you're looking for? And then how to help them bring that into issues that are more challenging and meaningful.
Right. Because the real questions are, what is important to you? What feels good? Right. What do you need? What kinds of food makes you feel energetic? What kinds of people make you feel cared for? Those are really hard questions to ask and really hard to let go of as we teach our kids to make these decisions.
What can parents do to protect their children from starting that spiral of the eating disorder, disordered eating behaviors?
Yeah. So I think it starts really young, and I think it starts, again, with ourselves, is that we really have to be aware of our own internal dialogue and the things that we are doing and saying in our own houses. And, we need to really try not to make comments about our own bodies, not to make comments about other people's bodies. I think we need to really be careful about not talking about our kids' bodies. Things really need to be not about weight. And I think things can very easily become this sort of all or nothing. We talk about health as like it's either healthy or it's not.
Right.
But it really is a continuum, and what might be healthy in a moment is something that feels good or tastes good or your friends are doing or is, celebratory. And, maybe that's not sort of like meeting the criteria of like what is healthy food, but it's healthy and enjoyable in the moment.
It's putting things in context,
Yeah.
putting things in perspective. And the one thing that I always talk about on the show is how things are all interconnected, that they are not black and white.
Never.
And
Never.
we would all like things to be able to be put them into nice, neat little boxes. And if I eat this, if I do that, what's healthy for me or supports my well-being may not support your well-being.
Right.
And how do we understand that everything matters to some degree?
So, I guess we're talking about ourselves, right? And sort of being more self-aware of ourselves. And I think it's also what you're talking about in terms of empowering kids to do their own thinking about what they think and what they want and what they need, which may be different from what other people are doing or saying or messages they're getting at school or from their friends or on social media. But really sort of teaching our kids that they know best about themselves, which can feel scary.
It's scary for adults.
Yeah.
I mean, when I'm working with my clients, helping them to understand to build their own self-efficacy when they've never had it. It's, if we can jumpstart that when they're little, it just creates such a more positive, more hopeful,
it does.
Less angst.
And yet we can see, right, that when your kids are little and, you need to feed them at a certain time, if they're not hungry, that makes you stressful. So we can see how it's difficult.
Right.
But however much we can do and allow and encourage, I think that's important. I think we also really need to teach kids, how to understand the messages that they're receiving, whether that's in a commercial or on social media or in nutrition class. But we really need to teach them to be discerning critics.
Yeah, and that's the word that I was thinking of, is how do we help them learn to evaluate the information, and just because you're hearing it, it doesn't mean that it's actually true.
Yeah.
What can parents do to protect their children? I know we've kind of have talked about that, empowering them. What other things come to your mind on best practices?
Yep. So I think, like I said, I think making things not about weight. I think teaching sort of inclusion and acceptance. Those things are really important. Teaching kids coping skills for how to deal with how to have difficult conversations, how to feel good about themselves, and I think that it can be really hard to go against this culture, but it is really important to do. I think. There's so many pressures on kids to do everything perfectly at an early age, and so that's where some of the stress comes from too. And I think if we can teach our kids that they don't have to be perfect, they just
need to be.
They just need to be. That is also really important.
What factors can trigger an eating disorder, and how can parents recognize the early stages of this disorder before it really full-blownly develops?
So one of the things that we know about what contributes to the development of an eating disorder is genetics, unfortunately. There's sort of a genetic predisposition to depression, anxiety, substance use, eating disorders. There's nothing we can do about that. But what we know is that stress can sort of be one of the triggers to any disorder, as can, in the case of eating disorders, one of the things I hear many, many times is having gone on a diet. Or having tried to eat healthy. And we really, really, really need to sort of slow that process down and examine and ask questions as to what the person is trying to accomplish and why and how they're doing it. So, I am all for trying to take care of yourself and be healthy, and, that can include nutrition. But I think when kids or when people start to avoid or limit certain amounts of food, kinds of food groups, that's kind of a warning sign. And if that is happening, you really need to have conversations about why and kind of monitor what's happening. So that's one thing that we can that is like a warning sign. Things that we see like increased isolation, loneliness, decrease in energy, or like previously enjoyed activities. Secrecy around eating and food behaviors is a big one. Sometimes like increased exercise or excessive exercise can be a sign that something is going on. Skin changes, hair changes, things like that.
Being aware, and if you get that feeling like something's not right,
Yep.
that's the time, as opposed to waiting to see what happens.
Absolutely.
Because when you get that feeling, it shifts the trajectory.
It shifts the trajectory, and there's
shift it.
help and there's support out there. And again, that goes back to sort of trusting yourself and being aware that there's something going on. The other thing that I think is really, really, really important to say is that, I think some of us have this idea that eating disorders happen to a certain, kind of like a white female, or, that eating disorders are about losing weight and being excessively and noticeably thin. And it's so important to point out that eating disorders can happen to any body, any gender, any race. And in fact, we're seeing the rates increase in more marginalized populations.
And they're dismissed.
And I think it's not well understood. And I think that, again, it's sort of this idea that if you don't look a certain way, then you can't have an eating disorder. But really what an eating disorder is sort of the preoccupation, with food and body and the attempts to control your body. And that can happen again.
Nobody's immune.
Nobody's immune.
What are effective ways to support somebody with an eating disorder?
Yeah. So this is tricky because I think a lot of times people who have eating disorders or are developing eating disorders aren't really ready
to be supported.
Aren't really recognizing that it's an issue. So I think if you're a parent, it's really important to just insist and to get comfortable with being the bad guy.
Being uncomfortable with the uncomfortable.
Yeah, because as you alluded to, sort of the earlier we can intervene, the less amount of time that it is happening, the better the outcomes. So, sometimes it can be pointing out to somebody or, that there's something you're concerned about, or taking them to get treatment when they don't want to, but doing it in a non-judgmental way, right, and not a critical way. And what I talk a lot with kids and with individuals about is sort of like the eating disorder voice, and being able to recognize that it's sort of this thing or this being that is in there, and that it's separate from kind of your own healthy, intuitive voice.
Yeah, people say, it's, when I hear practitioners talk, they say, well, that's your eating disorder voice.
Yeah.
How, it's such a hard conversation and concept.
It's such a hard conversation, but it's really important because what that says is it's the eating disorder voice that is, sort of compelling you or pushing you or telling you certain things.
That are not true.
And you have your own voice and you have your own values. And when you are experiencing that, it is it is awful, and it is paralyzing and immobilizing, and I think it's really hard to appreciate what that feels like until you have been there or been there with somebody. But when you are really suffering with that, it can feel intractable. And so that's why it's so important to kind of create some space in there, that the eating disorder may be telling you one thing, but you have your own sort of self-efficacy, and you have the ability to make your own choices.
Trying to separate it out,
Yeah.
so that you can strengthen that part.
Yeah.
That's going to lead you to
be able to make the change and to say no to your eating disorder.
Such a hard concept.
It's such a hard concept, but it's critical.
It's the only way out.
It's the only way out, because if we let the eating disorder sort of call the shots, then we know where this is going.
Yeah, it's really very more unpleasant.
Yeah.
How can we help people develop their own rules about health and wellness?
Yeah. Great question. So the first thing is, I think, to be aware of like what the rules out there are, right? To sort of be able to realize like, oh, that's diet culture telling me that, it's looking a certain way matters. And so that's the first step. And then being able to tap into what are our own values and goals. So I think my family used to get really annoyed with me because we would sit and watch TV, and I would sort of talk back to the TV.
And just imagine that conversation.
And they get really annoyed. But I think being able to, I was doing it for me because I was just so infuriated by some of the things I was hearing, but I also was kind of doing it to model that just because what you're hearing is not, sort of correct.
Right.
I've been known to, this is back when you actually listened to the radio and there were advertisements on the radio. I've been known to turn the radio off during a certain commercial, or again, talk back to different commercials that are coming, when we're watching a sporting event, or, so I think it's important to recognize the messages that are out there, and then be able to make decisions about what feels good, what's healthy, sort of what feels right to you.
And this ties into social media.
Yeah.
When I go to the supermarket, it's like my own little thing that I can do is that if I see a cover and it just infuriates me to what I am seeing, I will just flip. I will just flip the cover. So for my own safety, as well as perhaps the person behind me doesn't need to see it as well.
I like that.
How do we really continue the conversation about social media and the negative effects, and how can we change that?
Yeah. So. There are some positives to social media.
They're in there. We have to find them. You can curate a feed.
There are some positives, but I think as it relates to sort of body image and mental health, I think it can feel really challenging. So, first of all, I think there's some education again that needs to be had on sort of what's happening on social media, because first of all, we're not in control. We think we're in control of our feeds, but we're not. There's algorithms that are, very clearly designed.
Bigger than we are.
Bigger than I can understand, that are really focused on feeding you, sort of more and more extreme content related to things that you maybe have been searching for. We also, unlike, when I'm looking for a TV show or a movie to watch with my family, I have multiple resources that I go and I, sort of say, is it age appropriate, or, what is this going to be, like, what's the effect of this going to be? And we are all inundated with social media messages. We don't get content warnings. We don't know what we're getting, and we are further led to believe that everybody is doing or looking or not, a certain way, and so we are comparing ourselves. That's another, I think, big factor here, is that there is this sort of culture of comparing, and in the comparing, we fall short, right? We end up feeling bad about ourselves because we are comparing ourselves to what we think is just sort of a normal person, but it's not a normal person. And we are liking and following, I think, sort of accounts or people that, are kind of how we think we want to be, and then again falling short. So I maybe got distracted and lost it.
We're talking about, our social media feed is curated based on what we are interested in, whatever rabbit hole we are chasing. And over time, it creates this thing.
It gets curated by factors bigger
and you're
than
looking
ourselves.
at everybody's before and after pictures. You're looking at, if you're somebody who is searching dieting, you're going to have a whole feed that promotes dieting, thin, all the things.
Yes.
And just like we have curated it, where the algorithms build it there, we can also have other practices to start to shift the messaging that we are seeing.
Absolutely. And I talk about, that's a big thing that I talk about, is sort of, finding more positive, sort of inclusive, tolerant people, practitioners' accounts.
Seeing different bodies.
Because there's a lot of that is really wonderful and is out there. I just want to say a couple other things, though, about social media, because one of the things that is, when we talk about social media, one of the things that I think as clinicians we want to emphasize is that one of the things that, it's not only about what you are doing on social media, it's about what you are not doing when you are spending so much time on social media, right? So you are not engaging in real face-to-face relationships. You are not sleeping. You are not doing your homework. You are not having conversations around your household,
You're
right?
not present.
You're not present. And so that's one of the big factors, too, is sort of making sure that there's limits and, that sort of social media isn't impacting health and wellness in other ways by the amount of time that it is consuming.
It is not just about what you are seeing. It interconnects with all of the other aspects that create health and well-being.
Absolutely.
And especially your mental and emotional health.
Absolutely. You have to sleep in order to be healthy. And if your phone is dinging all night long, or you're up till 1 o'clock because you can't stop scrolling, then that is impacting your sleep and that's affecting your health.
And it's understanding, where do you start when you have all of these things that are connected to the media?
Right.
Because it's not just that one thing.
Well, it's not just that one thing, and there's this sort of pull of it, right?
It's the allure.
I've talked with kids who sort of have this maybe I can be aware that I don't want to be doing this, or it's not healthy for me, but what if I don't?
The fear of missing out.
The fear of missing out, right? Or the fear of, being the only one who doesn't have social media, or not picking up your phone, or missing something. And that is a real dilemma for young, for I think people of all ages.
It's everybody.
Yeah.
It is, when you are in it, there's a huge fear of missing out.
Yeah.
When you step away from it and you gain some distance,
Yeah.
those thoughts shift.
So I want to go back to something when you were asking about practices, right? Because there's a couple things I want to add. So one is that, I like sort of what we call exposure therapy, right? But sort of experiments, right? So I will say to somebody, well, could you experiment? Could you try? What happens if you don't log on to Snapchat, or you don't check Instagram for 24 hours? Could we try and see how that would feel, right? It may not be your, that might not be your gut reaction, right? That might not be what you think you want to do, but could we try it? Could you experiment with unfollowing something?
Are you willing?
Are you willing? So that's one thing, sort of exposing yourself to the thing that you fear, which I understand is very scary. And if you're going to do that, you want to think about, okay, so what am I going to do? If I'm going to agree that I'm not going to look at any social media for the next 24 hours.
Then you have 10 hours of time that you don't know what to do with.
Okay, so let's think about what could you do instead for those 24 hours. So that's one thing that I think is really important. Another thing that is important, when people come in and they tell me, well, I should or I have to, I say, says who?
Who said? Who
right?
told you that?
I don't know. Why should you, right? And kind of well, why or why not? And sort of asking the question and always going, and I kind of do it to be a little confrontational, but I ask the question a number of times. Well, why should you? Well, because I have to. Well, why do you have to? Well, because so-and-so says. Well, why, what did they, and sort of going back and back and back, and I think challenging those beliefs that we all have.
It's funny, it just it brought me back to my childhood and the expression that my parents would always say, if somebody told you that you should jump off the Brooklyn Bridge, are you going to do that?
Right.
No, of course I'm not going to do that. How do you bring in your own thoughts to more impactful conversations?
And it's about pausing.
The power of the pause.
It's about just slowing down and pausing, taking a deep breath, and just sort of thinking, why am I doing this? Who is telling me to? What am I hoping that, anything to create a little bit of distance
Space
between the thought and the action.
Yeah, it's when I work with my clients, we always refer to it as the power of the pause.
Yeah.
And when you get that, people don't understand how powerful and how life-changing it can be. Just a few momentary seconds can shift the choice between the automatic pilot and a deliberate intentional action.
Yes.
Many people, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but many people offer unsolicited information or comments about others' physical appearance or what they eat. How often have you heard, you look great, have you lost weight? How can people discourage such language and set boundaries around what is acceptable to say to you and your children?
Yeah, it's such an important topic. So the first thing is sort of knowing that it's okay and that you can set boundaries, right? And, I have been known to call the pediatrician before a visit, or talk to family members before a holiday. The other thing that I have done is I noticed that when I would see somebody, if I were to say something like, gosh, I like your sweater, which seems like a perfectly, sort of neutral thing to say, it would inevitably devolve into, do you? Oh, well, like I got it last year, but like but
it's old, it's on sale.
Old, and, I've been on a diet, and so what I have shifted in my own life is to say things like, gosh, it's really good to see you. How have you been since the last time I saw you? Right? Sort of asking somebody something authentic about who they are, or what they've been doing, or what's important to you or to them, rather than sort of something that is more superficial. It's really hard, and I have found myself, out in situations where people are talking about what they should eat, or what their diet, and it's really hard. But sometimes, and now most of the people in my life sort of
they know
what
to expect.
So I will sort of say, like, really, like, can we talk about something else, or that's not really important, So I think finding some way to just call attention to it and then move on, change it. And it's scary, right? Because you're scared of how other people are going to respond. You're scared of hurting somebody's feelings. But I think we can and need to change that dialogue.
And I have talked about this before on the show multiple times, because I just find it to be such an important topic, is that people don't understand the negative impact of what they are saying and how they are or could be supporting that disordered eating voice, because it gets strengthened every time.
And it's also just sort of strengthening and supporting the idea that what you look like or what matters, right? And I think people don't realize it, because I think, if you think about like our generation, right? And I think we're all steeped in it, and we almost don't realize that we're doing it. So it's not only that they don't realize the negative impact, it's that they don't even realize. You
don't even know what you don't know.
You don't even know that sort of like that's something that you're preoccupied by. So calling attention to it and knowing that you are doing it for yourself, or you're doing it to protect your child, and that is okay, and that you might be upsetting somebody, or you might be calling attention to something.
So what? Learn how to have the confidence to take the power back to protect.
Yeah.
And because it's not just an innocent comment.
It's not.
Are there other things we can do to foster positive body image acceptance, self-acceptance with friends, family, and the broader community?
Yeah, look, I think that kind of just like the idea that all bodies come in all different shapes and sizes and colors and genders, and like bodies are diverse, and sort of accepting that, and dare I say celebrating that, but sort of appreciating that that there's no right way, and that we can, as you said at the beginning, we can call a body fat or large or thin or purple, or it doesn't there's no judgment and criticism associated with it. It's just that bodies are. I know that's
it's a hard concept.
I know it's a really, really hard
and
concept.
If somebody had told me 5-6 years ago that I would be having this conversation and not be triggered by the fact that bodies are just bodies, I would never have believed that.
Yeah,
that would not have been a true statement in my mind.
Right. So maybe if somebody had said, like, it's possible.
Yes.
Right? Like, you may not be there yet, but it is possible.
And that is such an important word, and that's a word that I know I use with my clients, is talking about, you can't go from here to here in 12 weeks. That's not going to happen. Understanding I'm not there yet, or someday I will be able to, or it is possible.
And the fears and the challenges that come along with that, because I imagine, as you've learned on your own journey, right, that we sort of have to let go of or unlearn things that we've internalized and valued along the way, and that can be really hard. Maybe it means changing your doctor, or maybe that means not spending time with
somebody.
I remember back. When I was working at McLean and we were working in substance abuse, and we would have these discussions with teenagers who were trying to stop using, and they would really insist that they could just go back to the same friends that they were using with before. And the idea that, like, you might have to change your friends, or you might have to surround yourself by different people, or
scary.
You might have to change your Facebook feed. It feels really scary.
It's overwhelming, because not only you're taking away something that has been their focal point, now you're taking away what they believe to be their safe environment and helping them learn how to create a different safe environment. Yeah. What are some resources or tools you recommend for individuals seeking support or guidance in developing a healthier relationship with their bodies and fostering self-acceptance?
So there are so many good resources out there. In Massachusetts, we are lucky to have MEDA, MEDA, which is a wonderful organization. They have treatment supports. They also just sort of have body positive and, all sorts of different kinds of resources. I think that there are books and journals. I don't know that your book that you have back there, How to Raise an Intuitive Eater, the parenting, fat talk, the book behind me is a really wonderful book. There's lots of really excellent resources. I think even just finding individuals and sort of people in your own circles that have similar values is important. There's an organization called Feast.
That one I don't know.
It's great for families, that are sort of looking for support. There's a movement which there's lots of resources out there.
If you're willing, I will gather that information and be able to put that into the show notes so that people can find and use those resources that are available.
And I think it's really important, I talk with people, so one thing I've been doing recently is listening to lots of audiobooks. So I love listening to audiobooks, and so there's a bunch of really great books. You can read books, you can listen to books, there's podcasts, there's websites, whichever way is useful for you.
How do you learn best?
To access this, I think is
being willing to expand what you're learning and reading if it's not helping you. To be able to shift one small thing will start to lead you down another path.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for sharing all your information, and I know that you have a healthy practice that you would like to talk about.
I think I maybe had two.
You are welcome to share.
I think I had, we've sort of talked about it, but so one of the practices is this idea of exposure or sort of acceptance is to, when you look in the mirror or when you are going through your daily life, to really be aware of the self-criticism and the negative thoughts, and to pause and to reframe those into something positive. However positive you can.
What feels real to you.
Whatever feels real. And sometimes I tell people that, even if it's that my mom says, I have great curly hair, or my mom says that my body is is useful for me, or my voice teacher says that my body is excellent because it can, produce this beautiful sound. Even if it's not something that you can believe yourself, if you can find somebody out there and that over time you can come to believe that yourself. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that I talk about this all the time, and I really strongly recommend, is in whatever social media you are active, is to really make an effort to find positive, inclusive people, accounts, organizations, because when you open up your feed and you can have those really positive, reinforcing messages in there, it's so powerful and it's so awesome. So that's something I recommend everybody take 5 minutes and just Google, do some searching, body positive. There's dietitians out there. There's also,
and I'll include a few.
Yes.
I know that I have a bunch that I follow, and I would love
I
to
have
hear
some
who
too.
your top ones are, and that
Absolutely.
way we can curate a nice, easy list to help people take that first next action step to shifting their thoughts.
Yes.
So thank you so much
you
for
for having
being
me.
my guest. And today we have learned about the harmful influences of diet culture and the steps you can take to protect yourself, family, and friends from the mental health and eating disorders it can cause. If you are looking to continue the conversation, please feel free to drop in on my free office hours and my curated conversations that are offered monthly. You can find my schedule on my website at Lisa Dahl Wellness. And I would love to hear what your thoughts are about the conversations that we're having, what information you would like to see, and how I can best support you. Thanks for watching, and tune in next time for Getting Healthy Without Rules.